The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, just as I was reviewing the quarterly reports that showed our tech consulting firm had crossed the $5.5 billion million revenue mark for the first time. 5 years of 18-hour days, sleepless nights debugging code, and countless client meetings had finally paid off. I'd built something extraordinary from nothing. A company that specialized in cybersecurity solutions for mid-sized businesses, with a team of 12 brilliant engineers and a client list that read like a Fortune 500 directory. "Sophia, can you come to the house this afternoon? There's something important we need to discuss about the company's future." Dad's voice carried that formal tone he used when he was about to deliver news he knew I wouldn't like. I should have known something was wrong when I walked into his study and found my younger brother Marcus sitting in the leather chair across from Dad's desk, the same chair where I'd pitched my business plan 5 years ago, where I'd begged for the initial $50,000 investment to get started. Marcus looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact as he fidgeted with his phone. "Sophia, sit down." Dad gestured to the couch, effectively positioning me as the outsider in my own company's future. "I've been thinking about succession planning, and I've made a decision." The words that followed felt like a physical blow. Dad was transferring his majority stake in the company, my company, to Marcus. Not to me, the one who'd built it from scratch, who'd sacrificed relationships and sleep and sanity to make it successful. To Marcus, who'd dropped out of 2 different colleges, who'd never held a job for more than 6 months, whose greatest achievement was reaching level 80 in World of Warcraft. "But why?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad's answer was delivered with the casual brutality of someone stating an obvious fact. "Marcus is the only son, Sophia. This is a family business, and it needs to stay in the male line. You've done wonderful work, but ultimately, this is about legacy and tradition." I stared at him, searching for any hint that this was some kind of test or joke. But his expression remained resolute, and Marcus, my useless, entitled little brother, finally looked up from his phone with something that might have been sympathy, if I were being generous. "I don't want this to change anything between us," Dad continued. "You'll still have your position as CTO, and Marcus will learn the business side of things. It'll be a good partnership." Partnership? With someone who couldn't even manage to show up to our family dinners on time. I left that house in a daze, driving aimlessly through the city streets as the reality of the betrayal sank in. Everything I'd built, every innovation I'd pioneered, every client relationship I'd cultivated, it would all be handed over to someone whose idea of strategic planning was deciding which delivery app to use for lunch. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen, cycling through emotions like rage, disbelief, and a hollow sort of grief. But as the hours passed and dawn approached, those feelings crystallized into something much more dangerous. A cold, calculating fury that demanded action. I'd built this company. I knew every line of code, every client contract, every business process. More importantly, I knew every vulnerability. The first phase of my plan was subtle. Over the next 2 months, as Dad prepared to officially transfer ownership and Marcus began his transition into leadership, I started making small changes. I restructured some of our most critical systems, adding backdoors and kill switches that only I knew about. I moved our most valuable intellectual property, the proprietary algorithms that formed the core of our cybersecurity platform, to encrypted servers under my personal control. Marcus, predictably, was oblivious to the technical details. He spent his days in meetings trying to understand basic business concepts, while I maintained my facade as the supportive sister, helping him learn the ropes. Dad praised his natural leadership instincts, which apparently consisted of nodding along to whatever the last person had told him. The second phase required more patience. I began documenting everything. Every decision Marcus made, every meeting he mishandled, Every client he confused with his fundamental lack of understanding about our services. I created a comprehensive dossier of his incompetence, complete with recorded calls and email chains that painted a picture of a trust fund baby pretending to run a sophisticated tech company. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed leverage. 3 months after the ownership transfer was finalized, I got my opportunity. Marcus had scheduled a crucial presentation for our biggest client, a regional bank chain that accounted for nearly 30% of our revenue. The night before the meeting, he came to me in a panic. "Sophia, I don't understand half of this technical stuff they want to hear about. Can you handle the presentation while I focus on the relationship side?" It was perfect. I agreed to prepare everything, spending the entire night crafting what would become the instrument of his destruction. The presentation went exactly as I'd planned. I walked the client through our services, highlighting the technical sophistication that justified our premium pricing. Then, I introduced a new security protocol that Marcus enthusiastically endorsed, despite having no idea what it actually did. What it actually did was create a massive vulnerability in their system, one that I would discover and fix within hours, but not before word spread through our industry network about the security breach at one of our flagship clients. The fallout was swift and devastating. Within a week, 3 major clients had terminated their contracts. The bank was threatening legal action. Our company's reputation in the cybersecurity field was in ruins, and Marcus, who had publicly taken credit for the innovative new protocol, was being personally blamed for the disaster. Dad called an emergency board meeting, his face gray with stress and disbelief. Marcus sat slouched in his chair, looking like a teenager who'd been caught cheating on a test he didn't even understand. The other board members, Dad's old business partners who'd been skeptical of the succession plan from the beginning, stared at the financial projections with obvious horror. "We're looking at potential losses in excess of $2 million, our CFO announced. "If we can't contain this situation and restore client confidence, the company may not survive the next 6 months." That's when I made my move. "I might have a solution," I said, pulling out a folder thick with documentation. "But first, I think we need to address the fundamental leadership issues that created this crisis." What followed was the most satisfying hour of my professional life. I methodically presented evidence of Marcus's incompetence, from his failure to understand basic cybersecurity principles to his inability to maintain client relationships. I showed recordings of him making promises he couldn't keep and technical commitments he didn't understand. I demonstrated how his decision-making had directly led to the current crisis. But the coup de grace came when I revealed that I still had copies of all our proprietary code and client data, information that Marcus, in his ignorance, had failed to secure properly after taking control of the company. "The clients aren't just leaving because of one security breach," I explained. "They're leaving because they've lost confidence in our leadership's ability to protect their interests, and frankly, they're right to be concerned." I paused, letting that sink in before delivering my ultimatum. "I can fix this. I can restore our reputation, recover our clients, and rebuild what we've lost. But I need complete operational control. Marcus can keep his title if that's what the family wants, but every technical and strategic decision goes through me." The silence in the room was deafening. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week, and Marcus seemed to shrink further into his chair with each passing moment. "There's one more thing," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I want a new ownership structure, 51% of the company, with full voting control over all business decisions." "Sophia," Dad started, but I cut him off. "Those are my terms. Take them or watch everything we've built collapse completely." It wasn't really a choice, and we all knew it. The company was hemorrhaging money and reputation, and I was the only one with the technical expertise and client relationships needed to save it. Marcus had proven himself spectacularly unqualified, and Dad's traditional values had nearly destroyed everything I'd worked to create. The vote was unanimous, but my revenge wasn't complete yet. Over the following months, I systematically dismantled every trace of Marcus's involvement in the company. I restructured our operations, bringing in new leadership and implementing systems that required technical expertise he simply didn't possess. I relocated our offices to a building he'd never even visited, and I gradually eliminated every position where he might have been able to contribute meaningfully, not that there were many. The final stroke came 6 months later when I called another board meeting to discuss operational efficiency. As we continue to recover from last year's crisis, I began, I think we need to take a hard look at redundancies in our leadership structure. Marcus, who had been showing up less and less frequently as his irrelevance became more apparent, seemed to understand where this was heading. Marcus, you've been drawing a 6-figure salary for essentially no responsibilities. Given our current financial situation and the need to rebuild our reputation, I don't think we can justify that expense any longer. I looked directly at Dad as I delivered the killing blow. I'm recommending we eliminate the position of president and operate with a flatter organizational structure, focused on technical excellence. The vote was 4-1 in favor, with only Dad dissenting. Marcus didn't even try to defend himself. What could he say? That he deserved to be paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for contributing nothing? That evening, as I sat in my new corner office reviewing the contracts for 3 major clients we'd successfully won back, Dad called. "I hope you're satisfied," he said, his voice heavy with defeat and disappointment. "Actually, I am," I replied, surprising myself with how calmly I could discuss the destruction of my own family. "You wanted to preserve tradition and legacy, Dad. Well, now you have it. The company will survive and thrive, just like it always should have." "But at what cost, Sophia?" Marcus is devastated. "Your mother barely speaks to me. The family is falling apart." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city lights through my floor-to-ceiling windows. "The family fell apart the day you decided that my gender was more important than my competence. I just made sure the consequences landed where they belonged. I was trying to do what was best." "No," I interrupted. "You were trying to do what was easy, what was comfortable. What let you avoid confronting the fact that your precious traditions were more important to you than your daughter's achievements?" The silence stretched between us until finally, he sighed. "So what happens now?" "Now?" I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Now we run a successful company based on merit instead of chromosomes. Marcus can find something he's actually good at, maybe gaming or social media management. And you can learn to live with the fact that your legacy is being preserved by the child you tried to sideline." I hung up before he could respond. The aftermath of my revenge played out over the following year like a slow-motion explosion. Marcus, stripped of his unearned position and forced to confront his own inadequacies, eventually found work at a mid-level marketing firm where his lack of technical skills was less of a liability. He seemed almost relieved to be free of responsibilities he'd never wanted and couldn't handle. Dad tried to maintain his authority as chairman of the board, but his credibility had been shattered by the succession disaster. The other board members, all successful business people in their own right, had lost confidence in his judgment. Within 8 months, he was quietly asked to step down in favor of an independent chairman who actually understood the tech industry. The company thrived. We recovered all of our lost clients within a year and doubled our revenue within 18 months. I hired the best engineers money could buy, expanded into new markets, and built the kind of reputation for technical excellence that money can't purchase. Industry publications wrote case studies about our turnaround, and I was invited to speak at conferences about leadership and innovation. But success in business couldn't repair the damage to my family relationships. My mother, caught between loyalty to her husband and pride in my achievements, struggled to maintain connections with both of us. Family gatherings became tense, awkward affairs where everyone pretended that the elephant in the room wasn't trampling everything in sight. Marcus and I barely spoke, communicating mainly through stilted pleasantries when family obligations brought us together. The easy camaraderie we'd shared growing up, when I'd helped him with homework and covered for his various screw-ups, was gone, replaced by a polite distance that felt like a physical barrier. Dad aged visibly during this period, the stress of watching his family disintegrate taking its toll. He tried to bridge the gap several times, suggesting family dinners or business discussions that might restore some semblance of normalcy. But trust, once broken so completely, proved impossible to rebuild. 2 years after my hostile takeover, I received a letter from him, an actual handwritten letter, delivered by courier to my office. Sophia, I've spent countless hours trying to understand where everything went wrong, and I keep coming back to the same painful conclusion. I failed you as a father, and I failed our family as a leader. When I handed the company to Marcus, I told myself I was preserving tradition and ensuring stability. But I was really just taking the path of least resistance, avoiding the difficult conversations about gender and inheritance that I didn't want to have. You built something extraordinary, and I took it away from you for reasons that had nothing to do with your qualifications or contributions. That was wrong, and no amount of justification about family traditions can change that fundamental injustice. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished, both in building the company and in fighting to reclaim what was rightfully yours. You showed a strength and determination that I clearly lacked. The company is in better hands now than it ever was under my leadership or Marcus's brief tenure. You've proven that merit matters more than tradition, and that's a lesson I should have learned decades ago. I love you, and I'm sorry, Dad. I read that letter 3 times before filing it away in my desk drawer. It was too little, too late, but it was also the closest thing to accountability I was likely to receive. 3 years later, I sold the company for $47 million to a larger cybersecurity firm that wanted our proprietary technology and client relationships. I kept a small equity stake and stayed on as a consultant, but I was finally free to pursue other interests, including the nonprofit foundation I started to support women in STEM fields who faced discrimination and barriers to advancement. During the acquisition negotiations, the buyers asked about the company's history and leadership transitions. I gave them a sanitized version of events that focused on strategic restructuring and leadership optimization. There was no need to air the family's dirty laundry or explain the personal vendettas that had shaped the company's evolution. But privately, I knew the truth. I had methodically destroyed my brother's unearned position, undermined my father's authority, and prioritized business success over family harmony. I had used my technical expertise and insider knowledge to engineer a corporate coup that left my relatives devastated and our family fractured. Was it justified? Every rational analysis said yes. Marcus was objectively unqualified, Dad's decision was discriminatory and stupid, and the company genuinely thrived under my leadership. I had protected the jobs of a dozen talented employees and served our clients far better than my brother ever could have. But justification and satisfaction aren't the same thing. As I stood in my empty office on my last day, packing up 5 years of awards and achievements, I couldn't shake the feeling that my victory was incomplete. I had proven that I was more capable than Marcus, more strategic than Dad, and more committed to excellence than either of them. I had built something lasting and profitable from the ashes of their poor judgment. But I had also learned that revenge, no matter how perfectly executed, can't undo the original betrayal or restore what was lost. The relationship I'd had with my father, complicated but loving, built on mutual respect despite our disagreements, was gone forever. The easy friendship I'd shared with Marcus, despite his flaws and immaturity, had been replaced by permanent estrangement. The family I'd grown up in, with all its dysfunction and traditional biases, had effectively ceased to exist. Standing there in that corner office, surrounded by the evidence of my professional triumph, I realized that revenge had given me everything I'd thought I wanted: control, recognition, financial success, and the satisfaction of watching those who'd wronged me face consequences for their actions. But it hadn't given me peace. Maybe that was okay. Maybe peace was overrated when the alternative was justice, even if that justice came at a personal cost. Maybe some wrongs were so fundamental that they couldn't be forgiven or forgotten, only corrected through decisive action. As I walked out of that building for the last time, carrying a box of personal items and a check that would set me up for life, I thought about the young woman I'd been 5 years earlier. Brilliant, ambitious, and naive enough to believe that talent and hard work would be enough to earn respect and recognition. She was gone now, replaced by someone harder and more calculating, someone who understood that the world doesn't always reward merit, and that sometimes you have to take what you deserve by force. I missed her sometimes, but I didn't regret becoming who I needed to be. After all, I had built an empire, lost it to prejudice and tradition, and then taken it back through sheer force of will and strategic thinking. That was a story worth telling, even if it wasn't the kind of story that ended with everyone reconciling over holiday dinner. It was, however, the kind of story that ended with a $47 million exit and the knowledge that I had never, not once, compromised on my principles or accepted less than I deserved. And sometimes, that has to be enough.